HIV is not an accident, good people. HIV is what? A strategy for what? Population control. Abortion is a strategy for what? Population control. Ebola, West Nile. In AIDS, they would have you believe what? Where did they say AIDS come from? To this day, where are they saying AIDS come from? A monkey in the Congo. Listen. And this is the official line of the U.S. government. A monkey in the Congo, Central Africa, which is the richest piece of real estate on the face of the earth. Let me say that again. That's why there's so much fighting over there, which is engineered by Western nations. So while we fight against each other, they run out with all the wealth. They do it here, they do it in Africa, they do it in the Caribbean. Because black folks, if there's one thing you can be count on, is to hate one another and fight one another. That is your international reputation. All you need is one bag of weed, one gun, and just stand back and watch. Okay? But anyway, they say that a monkey in the Congo cohabitated with a black woman. And that's how AIDS came to be. And Ebola. Now, they don't say how the disease jumped from the monkey to the woman, but it happened. So my question to you, who in here is foolish enough to think that AIDS and Ebola comes from a monkey cohabitating with a black woman? But that is the dominant line of the government. If you don't believe me, go and research it right now.
The secret intensification of the biological weapons race in America make the Soviet efforts pale by comparison. Here to prove it are three of the most stunning and condemning documents in biological warfare history. First is a never declassified congressional record of 1969 showing the Department of Defense requested $10 million to develop, quote, synthetic biological agents for germ warfare, end quote, through the National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council, that is the NAS-NRC. That's nearly half of the amount of money given to all of biological weaponry that year. These new laboratory creations were descriptively and functionally identical to HIV/AIDS. Mind you, this was 15 years before the contested discovery of the AIDS virus by this man, Dr. Robert Gallo, who, as you will see in a minute, oversaw Litton Bionetics, the Army's 6th leading biological weapons contractor at that time. Bionetics also operated the entire administration of the National Cancer Institute's programs at Fort Detrick at that time as well. This private company was a medical subsidiary of the mega military weapons contractor called Litton Industries. Litton's president, Roy Ashe, was Nixon's alternate for the National Security Advisor post he gave to Kissinger. In consolation, the president made Ashe his White House chief of the American business and industry. As Roy Ashe was joining the Nixon White House staff, Kissinger ordered Admiral Zumwalt of the Navy to do a reassessment of America's biological weapons capabilities. The Navy has always been at the forefront of such things. Bioweapons were cheaper to make and could be made to target certain people, even certain ethnic groups. There is no doubt that Fort Detrick's sudden cancer focus was part of a greater depopulation plan. According to congressional records and his biographer, Time magazine's managing editor, Walter Isaacson, Kissinger selected the option presented by Admiral Zumwalt to develop AIDS-like and Ebola-like bioweapons, and the contract went to his White House colleague's company, Litton Bionetics. There is now no doubt that Dr. Gallo officiated the development of these AIDS complex viruses. His group at Bionetics combined leukemia, lymphoma, and sarcoma viruses from various species of animals nearly 15 years before he was credited by the Department of Health and Human Services for having discovered the cause of AIDS, a similar retrovirus. They said this would lead to a cure, an AIDS vaccine within 3 years. It never happened. I managed to catch up to Dr. Gallo at the 11th International Conference on AIDS in Vancouver in 1997. I asked him if he was concerned that some of his experiments might have given rise to the AIDS virus or AIDS virus relatives, that might have contaminated monkeys and chimpanzees shipped by Lytton to the Merck's vaccine division in New York for the production of the earliest hepatitis B vaccines. Here is the exchange Dr. Gallo eventually apologized to me for. He was obviously aggravated.
Do you have any concern that your early experiments in taking simian virus 40 in the presence of simian foamy retroviruses and recombining them with cat leukemia and chicken leukemia sarcoma viruses might have given rise to HIV or its relatives following their culture in human tissues, and that these mutants could have contaminated some live viral vaccines produced in contaminated monkeys and chimps supplied to vaccine manufacturers through your affiliates at Lytton Bionetics?
Quite frankly, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Affiliates at Lytton.
I'll cite your paper, Dr. Gallo.
If you can, you've got a paper. You've got a paper that I don't know I ever published.
Okay.
I sure like you decided. Would you begin?
I'd be happy to. National Academy of Sciences, 1970, Gallo et al. It was an oral presentation that you presented before NATO and NATO audiences in Mol, Belgium. You published it. It's in the National Academy of Sciences. I'll be happy to show you the paper.
Stop. I mean, this is beyond asinine. In Mol, Belgium, my first trip to Europe, so I can remember it, a NATO meeting did take place. NATO meetings fund all scientific meetings all over the world, even East-West at that time. Biologic meetings, scientific chemistry meetings, all kinds of meetings. Meetings about motherhood, fatherhood, everything. And what I talked about in Mol, Belgium was in the 1960s, long before gene cloning took place, before I ever worked in virology. What I talked about was cellular transfer RNA. Okay, and that's Mol, Belgium. Proceedings in the National Academy of Science and SV40. I never published a paper in my life on SV40, except the transfer RNA species in SV40 transformed hamster cells compared to non-transformed cells as a control. You've got pineapples, kiwis, grapes, and cherries mixed in with some other tutti frutti. I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
And excuse me.
Tired of this kind of nonsense.
Okay.
Crap.
And Gallo, Sarin et al. Were Lytton Bionetics researchers were your co-authors in which you combined cat leukemia and chicken sarcoma viruses to create evaluate the leukemia sarcoma complex models.
I'm really smart. Yes, we did. Everything was created by us working in the laboratory. Look, just for those with some little bit of understanding of this, who care about this kind of idea. I've had a lot of things said, but I've never had anything quite like that one. There were people who thought and made postulations that, and it was not actually directed at me, this is a good one, a new one, but that HIV could have been created in laboratory experiments. There are two answers to that are definitive, conclusive, that no scientist could have deliberately created them unless he was a super genius and 10 years ahead of his time. The AIDS virus definitively existed long before molecular cloning. That's point one. Point two, we know the full sequence. The genome of HIV was published by our lab in 1985, group from Paris around the same time. The genome has no homology to any known existing virus in the world, except SIV discovered after it. Has nothing to do with cats, has nothing to do with chicken sarcoma viruses. SB40 is a DNA virus that comes from little animals that can transform cells in culture, has no sequences in HIV. Further, we never worked with SB40 with those viruses together, and if we did, the whole thing would be irrelevant. And I think you need to begin with Biology 101 high school, okay?
These documents, including the U.S. government contracts, best explain how AIDS emerged on two far-removed continents in black Africans and gay New Yorkers by 1978. These were precisely the populations that received the first hepatitis B vaccines produced in Lytton's chimpanzees just 4 years earlier. By the way, the man sitting to Dr. Robert Gallo's right is Dr. Jonathan Mann. At the time, Dr. Mann was the AIDS czar for the World Health Organization. Not long after Dr. Mann witnessed my exchange with Gallo, he quit his most esteemed position, saying, quote, "Far more than a medical problem, AIDS is a socio-political imposition, end quote.
There is a shadow gliding over this world. I had a horrible dream, a hideous vision of what it was, where it came from, and what it would do. I was shown a laboratory somewhere in the United States of America. I was shown scientists of several nations, French, British, and American and Canadian, all collaborating in a hideous experiment, which was to introduce diseases which would wipe out whole armies, which would debilitate whole populations in times of war. And one of these diseases is the thing we call AIDS. AIDS is a man-made disease created as a weapon of war which proved so terrible that it had to be abandoned. They could not destroy the virus. They gave it to a firm of toxic waste disposal. But by that time, a number of containers of this hideous disease, which were yellow on the outside, of very thick metal with glass containers inside them, had already been taken to the land of the Germans, and there they had been stored in a secret place. Someone suggested that some of them should be dumped into the North Sea, not far from the west of Scandinavia. But others said no, they should be taken with other poisonous waste to third-world countries and buried there. A ship came from Europe bearing these containers, and one of them had a fault in its lid. A little accident occurred and a sailor touched one of the yellow cylinders and was contaminated by it through cuts in his hands.
Well, there have been reports now of this British seaman that went back to about 1954 when a chap died in England, and they went back and they had his tissues and they had blood, and they went and tested it, and he was found to be HIV positive.
When the ship arrived in West Africa, the cylinders were taken up aboard a truck, and from there they were taken aboard a dirty-looking helicopter. I could see them clearly what they did. This was contrary to agreement reached between this company and a corrupt African official, because the agreement had been that a hole should be dug very deep, but the official and his friends decided to pocket the money. They decided simply to dump the waste in an African lake, in a country called Cameroon. Some of the local villagers started becoming sick, and then the disease spread into Central Africa. In the very near future, people dying of AIDS will pose the greatest security threat that the Western civilization has ever seen.
All life is a melody. If you can find the right rhythm, you can cure the patient.
The people who created AIDS have the effrontery to say that AIDS is a disease of African origin.